Hello and welcome to the Federal webinar. I'm Srinivasan. Climate change is no longer a distant crisis sharing humanity at large. It's a clear and present threat. It's happening, playing out live in front of our eyes now. The Working Group of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, recently issued a code red warning saying climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. The objective of restraining the rise of global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius over the pre-industrial levels may head for a failure. From current trends, this target may actually be exceeded in 2035. Experts warn that by end of the century, the Earth temperature may rise over 3 degrees Celsius. There are voices which suggest that otherwise. They say this may not be the end of the world. Even at this point, if the countries get together and start implementing decisions, CO2 emissions could be slashed to calm the Earth. The United Nations Conference on Climate Change, that is a conference of parties held in Paris in 2015, which is called as COP, and now we are into COP26, was considered a turning point as nations agreed to act at different paces to tackle climate change. In UN jargon, this was defined as intended national determined contributions, or INDCs, nationally determined contributions. The rich nations promised to provide every year a contribution of $100 billion to help them adapt to the crisis. It remained largely as an intention. These big promises were hardly kept. In the IPCC's COP26 conference, beginning tomorrow on October 31st at Glasgow, the countries are expected to arrive with more promises, deeper cuts in CO2 emissions. In UN climate jargon, this is described as efforts to ratchet up the obligations. So which means that whatever the obligations were done in Paris, there could more be coming. The United States, which kept out of the COP meetings 2 years ago, has returned with current President Joseph Biden announcing net zero emissions by 2050. Other Western nations, which have done better as compared to the US, has promised the following cuts. If you give me a minute, I would like to show a graph on what kind of emissions the countries have cut. So here it is. I would like to share a graph that explains. So if you see on the screen, Britain has agreed to cut 63%, and this is based on 2005 levels. And again, the levels each country has chosen to their own desire. The United States has said that we'll cut up to 52%. And they have taken, I think, this is again 2005 levels. European Union, 51, Canada, 45%, Japan, 44%, and Australia, 28%. Though these promises were made that, this is prospective now, China, which is currently the number one polluter, followed by the US and EU nations, too has announced net zero by 2060. US has to cut its emissions 50 to 52% below 2005 levels, as you can see in the graphics in the next decade. But according to reports, no policies are in place to make that happen. So the worry is whether this will become another empty promise unless they really move. One hopes so that they will move. India, which is the fourth biggest polluter. I mean, that is what it is considered. I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that as if India is a country which pollutes more, because I would like to bring this to your knowledge that if you look at per capita spending which India does as compared to other countries is really per capita emission, if you see, is really low. Just 1 minute, I'll just like to show a graphic on what is India's per capita as compared to other countries. Just 1 minute. Yeah. If you can see this, United States 17.6. This is CO2 emissions in tons. China 10.1, Europe 7.4, India 2.5. So you can see the comparison. Whereas India's population, India's the geography of how many times this is. India we are 18% of the world population, as opposed to 4% of the United States. And our landmass is nearly 1/4 of what US has, roughly. So what should be our position? India, while fighting poverty and underdevelopment, is already facing the brunt of cyclonic storms, intense rainfall, cloudbursts, and drought in various parts of geography. I mean, in India, you can actually see one part of the country actually facing a drought and other floods. What has been the response of our government? I think we should examine this. So there is climate change on one side and local eco damage on the other, and both are happening simultaneously. How do we tackle? Is time running out for India? What can we do? So to discuss this, I'm joined by an eminent panel of experts here. I would introduce, and the format is such that after introduction, I would like each one of you to speak, make opening remarks, about 4 or 5 minutes. After that, we'll open up the forum for discussion, and later, if time permits, we'll also go for some kind of question. We'll take question answer session. So I have with me, let me introduce Leo Saldana. He's an environmental activist and coordinator of Environment Support Group. He's Bangalore based. Dr. Gurudas Nolkar is trustee Ecological Society Pune. Anvita Pandey, she's a forest ecologist at the Dehradun based Center for Ecology Development Research. And then Sumaira Abdali, an environmentalist from Mumbai and founder of NGO Awaaz Foundation. She's also a member of the governing council of Bombay Natural History Society. She joins us from Mumbai. Then I have Dr. Sri Kumar, a geologist by training and former member of Kerala State Environmental Appraisal Committee. He's joining us from Kochi. So we have tried to cover as much of geography as possible, from north to south, east to west. I start with Mr. Saldana, and I would go one by one to all the panelists. Please do include in your opening remarks your response to the question, should India stick its neck out and agree to net zero, or continue with the current trajectory of current situation of not agreeing to a trajectory, but specific cuts such as one agreed in Paris under INDCs? What should be your response?
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Srinivasan, and I greet all my co-panelists on a topic of enormous importance to humanity, unprecedented importance to humanity, that we are all here together. First and foremost, I'd like to say that right from the time when the world got together finally and constructed the Rio Declaration in 1992, the idea of common but differentiated responsibility was tied very closely with the polluter pays principle and the principle of intergenerational equity. What it really means is that historically, United States has contributed to 25% of the carbon which is bothering us today through the Industrial Revolution in the last 200 years. whereas India would even now rank to maybe 5%, China to maybe 10%. But if you put Europe in there, Europe would be somewhere around 25 to 30%. So basically, you're looking at Russia, Europe, and North America contributing a bulk of the carbon that is bothering the world today. So it's one thing to see it as incremental gains or losses every year. But if you take it overall for the last 200 years, which is the anthropogenic pressure on the climate of the planet, then obviously that's the concern that we have, that you have a country which continues to be the most powerful, the richest, militarily the most ominous, yet it is not willing to take its responsibility as seriously as it should have, not now, but 20 years ago. And if you take the pool of talent that there is worldwide in terms of technical pool, scientific understanding, nobody can outrank the United States. So why is it that it doesn't have a politics which takes seriously the fact that it is a country which has to be concerned not just for itself and its progress, but for all the world, because it has damaged the planet far more significantly than other countries are. Of course, Trump was not just an aberration, he's an outcome of that politics. And that politics has been building over a long period of time. And the fact that Trump walked out very arrogantly 2 years ago, and Biden is reversing that now. And if you see all of Biden's decisions in the last, say, 6 months or 7 months, all he has done is he has restored United States to a point where it had left the world in terms of the climate change talks. Of course, he's done a couple of things, which is to reverse the Keystone pipeline, which basically is to say USA actually is willing to not go in for fossil fuel, but go for something more cleaner. Those are symbolic gestures, but still Biden is doing undoing only the damage that Trump has done. So the world has really not made any progress this past year or the last 2 years. So we are in real trouble because as we see what's happening in Kerala, I must say that Kerala ranks equally with the Maldives today in terms of the risks it suffers from climate change. And across India, there are all regions which are vulnerable. And then you have the eastern parts of India. I mean, incredibly, we had 2 cyclones, one tearing through the east coast of India and then another through the west coast of India, which we have never ever imagined would be possible. And it's such ferocity and also so close to each other. So the east of India is highly vulnerable, and so, of course, northeast as well. And we have seen the Trans-Himalayan region, which is particularly vulnerable, not merely because of climate change and the potential damage that receding glaciers can do, but also because of the policies of India. So let's put it this way: common but differentiated responsibility is a global idea of making sure those who have contributed historically must take the responsibility and help those who must still catch up. And I would say that India should not step back from that. And there should not be a politics in which we kind of, sort of postulate to the world that, we are big, we are powerful, we are emerging economy and so on, because the idea of India is really not one idea. There are multiple Indias within India. And the top 1% seems to have gained enormously in terms of wealth and in its capacity to influence politics. So if you see most of the policies that India has instituted in the last 5-6 years, from the point Mr. Modi became the Prime Minister, the first major decision he took was to set up the TSR Subramanian Committee, which went into all the environmental laws and basically came up with the principle that the principle of utmost good faith will apply, utmost good faith in the most polluting polluters, that they will somehow reform themselves. So in a very ironic sense, what's happening around the world is the principle of utmost good faith that is now coming into the COP26, where the part of the world which has polluted the most is saying, trust us guys, we are really taking care of all of you, and let's go net zero, right? And the idea of going net zero is that, we'll somehow manage, all of us have to take the responsibility, common, differentiated, all those we'll take care of later. But right now, let's save the planet. Now, you see, the problem with our politics is we live in perhaps the most divided sense historically in the last 50, 60 years. We had, of course, the Cold War. We came out of the Cold War, and there was a movement towards coming together. And the Rio Declaration was an incredible gesture. And remember, in the Rio summit, George Bush, the senior, did not go. It was Dan Quayle was the vice president he sent. So
Right.
USA has systemically been an agency for not taking up responsibility. So I'd like to submit that if we are really to make a big dent, India should take up the leadership to marshal the developing world and make a strong pitch, a very, very strong pitch to make sure the polluters pay and pay right now.
Right. I'll come back to you because the world itself has changed. What you're referring to over the years, the global politics too has changed. It's not just about the environmental politics. The overall, there is a certain change in the way India could assert itself earlier and what is currently happening. We can discuss more of that, but I would like Dr. Gurdas Nulkar to make his opening remarks.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Srinivasan. Very interesting points came up from Leo Saldana also. Let me submit to you my couple of arguments which I wish to make about the net zero business. The most important thing which I would like to keep in front of you is that we certainly and obviously have global commitments and global targets. But I think one of the key points that the Indian nationally determined commitments have been missing is, are we geared up internally to meet the net zero targets? That is point number one. And the second one is, are we actually addressing the entire question of intra-generational equity, which is completely absent in India today? The global average is talking about the intergenerational equity. However, in India, we have the bigger problem of inequity within the current society. So that is the other point. So from the point of the governance or the structure of the ministries which we have today, and the question of, are we really geared up to meet the net zero targets? Are we really serious about them? I would say that this is certainly not the situation. And why am I saying this? Just simply look at the way the Niti Aayog is structured, and the think tank sitting with the Niti Aayog, as well as all the ministries that we have. The country is being ruled and governed by economic considerations alone. The entire Niti Aayog team, we do not have a single geologist, a botanist, a biologist, an ecologist. Some of these key people who are extremely critical to guiding policymakers and ministries and other think tanks in that. The second point, if you look at it, if you see the structure of the ministries today and the way they are answerable to the Niti Aayog and to the government of India, growth is the primary concern for ministries of coal, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Heavy Industries, Ministry of the Jal Shakti, Agriculture, Petroleum, Renewable Energy, Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, so on and so forth. On the other hand, the mandate of development rests solely on perhaps just two ministries, which is the MoEFCC and to some extent the Ministry of Earth Sciences. And to support them, we have a very flimsy mechanism, which is the National Green Tribunal. Now, this together is such a structure which is extremely weak and fragile to take care of the net zero commitments that we wish to make. That is the first thing. Second thing is, coming to the net zero commitments that we have made. Like I said earlier, the larger responsibility, I think, which we need to have today is to the current generation of people which we have in the country, which means for us, adaptation to what is happening becomes a very critical factor than mitigation. Now, adaptation is a very private good. On the other hand, mitigation is a global common good. So we must submit and we must.
I think, Dr. Nulkar, if in the interest of a general viewer, you must also explain what adaptation means, because these are jargons which common person will not understand. When you say adaptation, please also go along slightly explaining that will help. Yeah.
Okay, so adaptation, to say simply, would be the process of changing yourself to meet a new situation, right? On the other hand, mitigation would be the action of reducing the severity, action of seriously thinking or doing something so that in future these kind of events are not happening a lot. So that's in a very, very layman and simple terms about what adaptation and mitigation. And therefore, if you look at adaptation, it becomes a private good. It becomes a good that is going to affect the people of the nation. On the other hand, mitigation becomes a public good, which is for all the denizens of the planet. And that's something which we must follow, but we also need to look internally within the national boundaries about how we are going to go about it. Just one or two examples of the need of adaptation, which Leo Saldana talked about. All the cyclones which have been coming and the destruction which we have been paying through the taxpayers' budgets, and a phenomenal amount is diverted from real development to NDRF and mitigation and funds for subsidies, so on and so forth. And this is pulling down the entire green development agenda of the nation. So I think I'm coming to the end of my time. So the last point I want to submit is this. If we really need to be serious about the net zero emissions, we have to restructure the way cooperation is happening at present between the ministries, and we have to have certain kind of people on the Niti Aayog who are going to push the think tank agenda onto the ministries.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Nulkar. You have taken a different angle. You're talking about the structure of governance itself, which is important. You're saying the basic infrastructure or the administrative structure itself is not geared to achieve this net zero target. Let me now go to Madam Sumaira. Mumbai, you're living in a city where I suppose maybe you have to buy boats because flooding has been an annual event now. And you have seen through the years, what is that you would look at when you see COP26 happening, when you hear that? How do you look at it? Because it's tomorrow. And how do you see this?
Yeah, it's tomorrow. So we've had a long build up to it in Mumbai and Maharashtra, because we've had, as Leo Saldana mentioned, we've had unprecedented cyclones and we've had floods. The first time we flooded, we thought it was just a freak event, but now we've all got used to it. We have these floods every year. At the same time, we have a government who is very committed in their speech, at least, towards restoring and preserving the environment. And Mumbai has the first government which has got now in place a climate mitigation plan, a climate action plan. It's called the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, which takes into account every sector from air pollution to biodiversity to everything you can think of. And on paper, we have a fantastic kind of a roadmap to achieving net zero. And we have also joined the Climate 40 cities internationally ahead of it, made commitments in New York. We have everything going for us, except that it doesn't work on the ground. Because we have these cyclones, we have these floods, we have all kinds of infrastructure projects coming up, which are not meeting the goals that we say that we want to meet. And the tough action, which is against, we have a goal like the rest of the country has of 30% EVs, for example, by 2030, which is great. But, India's budget doesn't support this because it doesn't have anything. So again, I agree that our policies on paper sound very good. And we go to COP26 and we have all these commitments which we make. But on ground, at the same time, we cut forests in the RA to construct a metro in Mumbai. We displaced the whole coastal area of Mumbai. Mumbai is defined by its beautiful coastline by building a coastal road. In other parts of the country, we destroy forests to mine diamonds. We have 40 coal blocks which were proposed during the early part of lockdown. So these things don't show me that the aspirations that we have can really be implemented. It just shows that we have wonderful aspirations, as we should have. And I feel that rather than blaming other countries for what they are doing, as the fourth largest emitter in the world today, we who are so proud of our historical capabilities of leading change should really lead that change. And we have the capacity. We have very, very committed young people who have opposed the environment impact assessment notification successfully by sending in lakhs of objections. We have technological expertise, which allows us to lead the world in so many different things which we are committed to, whether it is technology of the internet, which we're using to speak on now, or anything else. We have the capability of not following the course of the West, maybe developing differently than the West has, because we know from experience that the West's development model has failed. And they have spent money in development, and they are spending much more money than they spent on development in reversing and correcting their faulty development. There was a time when I was young when we believed the world would stop without coal and oil. But today we know that the world has not stopped without coal and oil. In fact, it's these people, the young people of those days, which came out with new paradigms, thinking out of the box, which discovered that we can have solar energy, we can have so many other types. India leads the world. It has become the 5th largest producer of solar energy, according to the ministry itself. But that is not enough for us. Maybe we need to, we are still increasing our coal-based capacity by destroying forests. We are still increasing our need for coal. Maybe some of that money which we're spending on building coastal roads and statues and other models of development which are now being dismantled in other parts of the world, specifically coastal roads which are being dismantled, we could spend in spending R&D in figuring out other ways of developing where we are not led by the West, but we lead the West. And that's what I would really like to see happen.
Right. I have a question here. Exactly. This is the point. You are saying that, the West has misled us all along. They said coal is everything, oil is everything, and we are brought up on that staple diet, and you suddenly now realize after 30, 40 years that's no longer true. Maybe the sun is more effective. Isn't this also provides an opportunity to jump onto this and work on that? Why should we be dragging our feet? Should India confidently saying that, okay, we'll go for this. We have a better renewable understanding. We have done it for years. We'll go for it. Why we are unwilling to give a long-term commitment? Maybe this will motivate other nations. Like you yourself were saying, if there is an opportunity to build a new narrative, possibly you're getting that, why leave that?
Absolutely. I feel that, we, rather than pointing fingers and saying, pehle aap, you start, you are the worst, every person should start with themselves, and India should start with itself. We are so proud of our heritage, our history. Recycling is part of our DNA. So many eco-friendly, we worship forests. Why not make use of that and show them the way? I'll just talk very briefly, or maybe I'll do it in the later session.
Right. I'll come back to you. Yeah. Sure. I'll come back to you. Let me have the preliminary remarks from others. Anvita, Dr. Anvita, if you can say what's your opening remarks and what do you think about net zero?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. I think the earlier speakers have already set a very good platform for me to speak. So I would like to take it forward from there. Starting with what Gurdas ji has mentioned. So even if we have all the infrastructure and all the ministries and everything in place, will we able to guarantee that we'll be able to achieve that we would not go beyond 1.5 degree increase in temperature, which has been committed in the Paris Agreement? Because as the figures show, what Srinivasan ji has mentioned in the beginning, that India is the least emitter. So if it is the least emitter, and even if we go the net zero and we do everything, whether we'll be able to contribute much towards the emissions that are happening. My say would be that India has certain reasons for not going for net zero, and the major reason behind that is whatever infrastructure or whatever policies that best India can produce, they are already moving towards it. They already have a 100 gigawatt of renewable energies that's been generated. They have committed for 175 more. So actually, such infrastructure have already started up, and they have already been implemented in India. But the problem with the developed countries is who are the major polluters. What they are doing is they are not keeping up with their promises of, again, mitigation and the adaptation fund, which they were supposed to give to the developing countries. So that promise has not been fulfilled. Then they are talking about carbon credits. So in terms of carbon credits, so I come from a Himalayan state. We have a lot of forest, almost 57.7% of the geographical area. If I exclude areas above 4,000 meters, then it is all forest. And forests are the major sink of carbon storage. So Himalayas, the terrain and the peculiarity of India is Western Ghats, Himalayas. So that thing are not taken into account, the vulnerability these states face and the contribution these states actually provide. So I agree to the India stand of that they are saying that they'll be coming on the solar, they have done solar alliance. So that's a very good program that they are going ahead with. Then they have some global climate initiative, which is also a good step that they are doing. Then sustainable land use practices that we are actually doing. So India in its full strength is trying a lot. And I am with the concept of non-net zero because it cannot be achieved. It's a very ambitious target that people are talking. Let's talk things which can be implemented on ground, because the world has made many fancy policies which looks good in paper, but when it comes to implementation, it becomes actually very difficult to implement, especially in the case of carbon credits, where India has actually it's not at all, and there are many challenges and risks which is involved with the carbon credits and other things that is mentioned. So I can speak about it in the later session when we move forward.
Right.
Yeah.
I would also request you to also explain in simple terms what carbon credit means in one line and go on to explain. We'll certainly revisit that. I would like to come back to, because a lot of general viewers may not be familiar with these kind of concepts. So it would be helpful if it is explained.
Yes.
So I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Dr. Sri Kumar, if you could tell us, because here the net zero, nobody seemed to be in favor. It's almost all my panelists seem to suggest that, that's not the case. There's something else. What do you think?
Yes, I also I am agreeing with all the panelists as they mentioned. But this is our moment. There is no second chance. So do the level best to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and net zero emission by 2050, so that we can achieve. So long-term commitment is not required. That is what I say. World leaders will soon be put to the test at UN Climate Conference. And you see that their actions or inactions, so that will determine the future of our planet actually. And you see that already the first speaker has already said, all over the world, you see that the warning signs have come up because of the impact of the climate change. The temperature is reaching new highs. North America, extreme temperature. You see that many died in heat waves. In Canada, British Columbia, temperature is 50 degrees Celsius, and California, it is 54.4 degrees Celsius. So that is in one part of the globe. But you can see in another part, you can see the extreme rainfall, extreme events like flood and rainfall is taking place. So as the sea level is also rising, and you can see that the experience, even Kerala, you can see that it is thickly populated. The coastal tracts of Kerala can be underwater, and some of our small islands will be submerged underwater if we go like this. So anyway, all the people must sit together, and we have to make long-term plans for that. And you see that I came across one article in Lancet, and you see that the impact on human health, that is going to be a very, very important threat. Respiratory illness, and also the disease outbreak, epidemics, that is going to be deadly disasters in the future days. And coming back to India, we can see that the India's emission story cannot be compared with the top three countries. India is responsible for no more than 4.37% cumulative carbon emission since the pre-industrial era. And you see that as somebody have mentioned here, you see that national level also we must have some kind of things, because we have got the rich and the poor people, and this inequality in the within the national boundary also we have to address these things. So how we can address the inequalities, rich and the poor? So you see that the rich and the middle class people are enjoying, but whereas the poor people are lacking the food, they are lacking the shelter and other kind of they are not consuming just like the rich people or the middle class people about the food consumption. So everything, if you look at, you can see that as usual, India emits say 7% of global emission, has an extremely low per capita emission that are far below the global average. That ranks as the world's third largest emitter, and you see that the high density of population in India, still we are in a better position. So I think by adopting long-term strategies, we may be able to reduce, and we can make a better development in carbon emission. And you see that increasing the forest cover is a very important requisite, and also the renewable power we have to depend upon, and we may have to switch over to the electric vehicle and all these things. And reduce fossil fuel is a very important thing as far as India is concerned. So we have to give emphasis for that type of strategies, and also the public transport to be strengthened. And another very important aspect in India I found is the waste management. So that is going to be how to do that in a scientific way, that we have to address in future days. And the consumption, that is a very important thing as far as the density of population is concerned. So how we can limit the consumption and equally distribute among the people. So these are all things that we have to address in the future days.
Thank you very much for all the opening remarks. I would now open up the discussion. See, we are right now on one aspect of it, which is macro aspect, how COP26 could affect us. But the thing is, we are already seeing the destruction. We are already experiencing. It's no longer just a theoretical construct. We are seeing on a day-to-day basis things happening around us. Let me share a small video which perhaps illustrates more than any other word, any amount of word. A 2-minute video perhaps will tell us a better story. So here it is.
And it's been drying out for 2 years, so it just explodes. It's very, very terrifying.
So, I think this short video, though it's horrifying, but it does give a facet of what's happening around the globe. It's not just, it's Uttarakhand, Kerala, whatever you name, it's there. So we are already witnessing this. Are we doing enough? We'll come back to what should we do about COP26, what should be our position. Maybe we can go around in the concluding remark. But the question which is present is, on the one side, mitigation is a question, which means can we reduce carbon? We are saying that we don't produce enough carbon and dioxide. Actually, it's very less as compared to what the rest of the world is producing. But on the other hand, all this devastation, which you also see what is happening in India, are also responsible for many things, from Karnataka to Kerala to Uttarakhand. If you look at the government, the kind of decisions they have been taking. So I would like to, Mr. Saldana, if you can give an overview on that. What do you think of this? In Karnataka, where you live, perhaps you know how there are various projects which have raised a lot of controversies. That Hubballi Ankola Railway Project, Kaiga Atomic Power Plant, expansion of 5th and 6th unit, Sharavati Pumped Storage Hydroelectric Project. In each of these projects, besides the whopping cost, it's alleged that the projects will destroy protected areas. And there's specific data available. Number of trees will be uprooted. Each of these power plants will use, or the projects would use a whole lot of forest land and resulting felling of trees. Also the ecological integrity of Kodagu, which again is likely to result in, felling trees. When you see all this, are we doing enough within our own country to safeguard what is currently happening? Are we able to do anything about it?
Yeah, thanks. It's a question that takes some effort to respond to, but I think you have illustrated very clearly the type of damage that we have witnessed, and every one of those massive damages that you have illustrated is all very recent. Now, if you take what has happened, say, since 2013, when the Uttarakhand flood took place, I went and saw that. And to see dams being thrown aside like they were mere matchboxes due to the cloudburst that took place, and multiple dams. And here we have extractivist development becoming the mainstay of India's economic policy. So if India was to really go and make a strong pitch in a global platform, I guess everybody will ask, what are you doing back home? And I don't think Prime Minister Modi can be very confident about saying that I did everything right. In fact, what we have seen is he's done everything wrong as far as the economy and the choices about environment and natural resources are concerned. First and foremost, as you rightly say, we are tearing into the Western Ghats. We are tearing into the Himalayas. One of the first major policies of the Modi administration was to actually liberalize what we call the environmental clearance regime, in which the requirement for people to be involved in decision making was kicked aside for major projects, such as so-called linear projects. If you question nuclear projects in forest areas like Kaiga, you are labeled easily anti-national, as several of our friends in Tamil Nadu were labeled under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's administration. So to be an environmental activist like Disha Ravi experienced, you could just get plucked out of your house because you edited a file online. So now my point is that unless we understand all these as a result of an extractivist paradigm of development, which benefits maybe 1, maybe maximum 5%, who shape the politics of the day, which is why farmers are protesting outside Delhi for almost a year now, through the rain, through winter, through summer. I mean, any humane government would have reached out to them and did not require the Supreme Court or High Court telling them that you should talk. That is the idea of democracy. And I think as a democratic government, we are failing. And if you want to address climate change, you need to deepen democracy. We have seen in Dakshin Kannada region, for instance, I worked there in the 1990s, when a massive influx of all the dirtiest polluting industries was pushed into that ecologically fragile area. And there was a pushback from the fisher community, from the coastal communities, from the farming communities, from the Adivasis. And several projects were therefore rejected because the government does not have wisdom. The government is basically a can in which anybody who can make a lot of impact throws their cans into. You know, it's a bin in which they throw their can into and make a lot of noise. And whoever makes the most noise gets to marshal the resources of that day. We have to step away from that form of, engagement, because climate change is warning us that that kind of decision making is catastrophic. The decision making itself is catastrophic, and its results obviously are catastrophic. So I would like to suggest that if India wants to hold the world responsible, Indians must hold India's government responsible first and foremost. And we are not doing enough of that. There are a lot of resistances against destructive development. I would definitely believe that India must step away from coal mining and move towards renewables, but not the renewables you saw in the Uttarakhand area, not the minor so-called run-of-the-river schemes we saw in the Western Ghats, which are all really mega dams or major dams, if not mega dams. We should also think about our urbanization platforms and see how we can minimize. There are environmental limits to everything. Cities are environmentally limited. And if we can realize that expanding cities is not the way out, but expanding the idea of development in which inclusivity is central could be possible. Everybody needs to live, not just those in cities, and not only those who have access to wealth in cities. So I think climate change doesn't discriminate. It's one of those, I would say, Earth's policies which just goes and attacks a region. But then we must also realize that those who have access to wealth can buy their way out a lot of miseries. So we have that kind of a situation in India. So my point is that if we were to actually think of it as a technocratic choice, we are going to lose this chance. This is the last chance we have as humanity, as Indians, as people, wherever we are. Right. And that chance is possible only if we can ensure. And Kerala, for instance, has made excellent progress in deep democratization. Many other parts of the country have done. So deep democratic choices are also ecologically wise choices. When we do that, we may probably be able to shape a future of our country in such a way that it can become a remarkable icon for the transformation humanity needs.
Right. I think Dr. Nulkar, you want to comment? Yeah.
I completely agree with what Leo Saldana is just saying. The structure of the democracy is also is something which completely needs to be radically changed. We have been following a highly centralized democracy ever since the British left us. And, we have just continued with that tradition. The British centralized everything for a reason. They were managing a colony. We are no longer a colony of anybody. We have to decentralize. The entire country, no other country, I think, perhaps other than Brazil, in the tropical climate, is spread across 28 latitudes. The amount of rainfall that Kutch has is completely different from the amount of rainfall that the northeast states have. The sunlight reaching Ladakh is different from the sunlight reaching Kanyakumari. We are such a biodiverse and physically diverse climatic country that we have to be decentralized. How can we not allow the local regional people to take their own decisions about natural resources? How can we have all the coal going over to the industrialized cities? Urbanization is the second point which Leo Saldana said. I think that's very important to understand, that urbanization as a policy is alienating the villages for such a long time. We are creating centers of power, we are creating centers of infrastructure and centers of comfort and convenience. Everybody wants to move there. Now, this is a no-brainer. We are going to increase the size of the cities. And once you enter a city, your per capita consumption of natural resources just skyrockets up. The amount of water that a village uses per capita is completely different from the amount the water in an urban Indian uses. The other point I wanted to make.
I want to ask you a question here. Dr. Nulkar, I do agree with Dr. Saldana's point that if India wants to hold world to a world account, then it itself must do something. Should be an example of what we have done internally. But look, there is a recent study which pointed out that in the current COP26, liberal democracies, West especially, 80% voters, I'm talking voters, not just population, are in favor of measures which will actually cool the earth. They want that to happen. And that there is a consensus which is built there. The United States was a bit of an outlier till the regime changed there. And then now Biden wants to bring back, as Mr. Saldana said, that actually Biden is not doing anything great, but he just want to go back to what US had promised earlier. But the point is, if you are going to look at that, Western democracies and US, even in their case, it's only, I think, when it has hit them that they seem to be waking up to the fact that climate change is actually a reality. Many politicians, they're also not agreeing to that. So how come that whereas India is a less polluter and global pollution seems to be a bigger culprit here? What is happening within India is worse. I'm not trying to defend it. But shouldn't that be tackled?
Absolutely. I think, and this brings me to the point where you earlier said, you started off with that chart showing the per capita emissions that India is making and what the world is making. See, for the planet, per capita is absolutely, it just does not measure up. What matters is aggregate consumption and aggregate emission. So in India, with 1.2 billion people, our aggregate emission is far higher than many other countries which have a per capita higher emission. So I think we have to come out with the economic fallacy of reducing everything to per capita. It is aggregate which matters for the planet, and it is aggregate which we must reduce. That is the first point. Second is, you talked about Western democracy and Indian democracy. One of the things which is completely lacking in the Indian scenario is for the democracy to succeed. There are, in fact, two things which are lacking for democracy to succeed. The first and foremost is the right kind of education. We do not have access to the right kind of education. Ecological education is completely absent. Civic rights education is completely absent. We must get that back into our national education policy and into the education. And second is a complete freedom of the press. We do not have a freedom of the press. We have monopolies which own a lot of these press houses, and they are out, and we know how a lot of these presses are big. So if you have the right kind of education and if you have the freedom of press, then people will come to know what is happening with the democracy, and then they will take a choice of thinking about a decentralized participative democracy and whom to choose. So I think these are the prerequisites before we move on to a decentralized democracy.
I will quickly come to Dr. Sri Kumar, who's been waiting. And Kerala, we have constantly been discussing and actually seeing how Kerala is facing the brunt of massive climate change. So here is something which is quite interesting to look at. Just before the elections in Kerala, assembly elections, Pinarayi government, the time they were in power and they have returned back to power, announced several projects which were again environmentally controversial. It had floods in 2018, floods and landslide in 2019, and it only seemed to prove that past development projects had adverse environmental consequences. This year again, we have seen extraordinary rains. So again, the government, which otherwise has done very well as far as social indicators are concerned, but when it comes to environment, they don't seem to think differently. You look at the kind of decision which has happened, the clearance for Greenfield Airport, that ecologically fragile portion of Western Ghats, which is close to the Sabrimala, which is a pilgrim station, green signal for multi-crores, semi-high-speed rail corridor, quarrying, transport and transport of sand from Pampa near Sabrimala, green signal for controversial Atirapalli. Hydel project. I can go on and on. The point is, as a geologist, perhaps you've seen these things closely, but even Kerala, if you look at the kind of decisions they have been taking, is not very environment friendly.
Right?
Yeah.
May I speak?
Yeah, sure.
Yes. Yes, sir. So actually, we know that there is a slogan, think globally, act locally. So that is very important. That's a very important slogan that we have to hold. You see that as you have screened many events in India and also along the coastal tract of the West Coast and the East Coast, the cyclone and other events are taking place. And it is repeatedly taking place. And I remember that the eastern coast of India was prone to different kind of natural disasters, cyclones and other tsunami and other things. But you see that the West Coast was not that much vulnerable. But because of the climatic change, because of the temperature rise in the sea, you can see that more and more cyclones are striking along the west coast of India. And you see that the Maharashtra also, we had experienced a unexpected cyclone. Kerala also, we are facing frequent type of cyclones and depressions. So this is one thing. So our coastal tract is prone to any kind of inundation and also coastal erosion. And it is thickly populated. If you take Cochin and Alleppey to Cochin, that segment, you can see it is highly densely populated area. So what is happening there? You see that our mangroves, we are for the sake of tourism. You see that we are almost chopping our mangroves and other developmental activities. So that is on the western side along the coastal tract. And when you come to the eastern part, you see that we have got the Western Ghat, and you see that the Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and all these states are having the forms part of the Western Ghats. And we have got the Western Ghat Ecology Expert Panel, and you see that Professor Madhav Gadgil Committee report was submitted. And you see that the essence of this committee report was something that the Western Ghats are very fragile, and we must have ecologically sensitive areas, ESAs, and that these ecological sensitive areas must be protected, and whatever things that you can do, whether we can live there, whether we can make quarry or any other kind of industries we can start. So we have to make a zonation. And this zonation is based on consultation with the local people. That is very, very well said in the report. But you see that it was understood in Kerala, and you see that now you see that people are suffering actually because the landslides 2018, 19, 20, 21, and you can see repeatedly landslides are happening along the Kerala Western Ghats. And this is mainly because of some of the road cuttings, and also because of the impact of the unscientific land use practices that we are following here. So in such situation where you see that the natural phenomena becomes natural disaster. So all the natural phenomena, we can, that we cannot prevent that, but that will come. But we can we can reduce or we can prevent natural disaster to a certain extent if you frame policies, and if you can regulate the human intervention in such areas.
Right.
And as a result of this one, we have a lot of wetlands here, the western coast of Kerala. And the flood comes, you see that our Vembanad Kayal that receives water from the rivers, and that will support, or that will conserve the Alleppey and other towns situated nearby. But now you see that the shrinkage of the wetlands, paddy fields, everything. That is what happened in 2015. We had seen in Chennai, and you see that it is because of the shrinkage of the wetland. So we are talking about this one, and you see that what government of India has done, EIA draft 2020, and we have seen that actually it is a protective measure. EIA draft, EIA environmental impact assessment notification. So that is very important asset, and that can prevent many of these unscientific practices. But what we have done, you see that now the entire rule was diluted, and you see that there is no environmental impact assessment or public hearing for quarries or mines having area greater than 5 hectares. It is not there. It is withdrawn. And you see, what about the permission for the built up to 20,000 square meter, 2 hectare? It was there in the previous 2006 notification. But now you see that it comes to 150,000 square meter in the EIA notification. So we are diluting like anything, these kind of restrictions. And how can we survive these natural disasters? So that is a very important question that we have to ask.
Okay.
So only if you want to defend or mitigate the effects of the natural disasters, definitely we have to make a scientific land use practices in all the states, whether it is in Kerala, whether it is in Karnataka, and also in other states it is like that. But you see that Kerala, it is more severe because our geography is totally different from the other states, neighboring states. So the problem is more in Kerala. So there is new projects like the Silver Line.
Right. So Dr. Shikumar, I'll come back to you. I think we are almost an hour into the webinar now. But before we go further, I would like to make a small announcement. Please bear me with me for a minute, all of you. This is important for our own survival, the federal website. Recently, we placed our premium product, which we call as 8th column, behind a paywall. Our website, www.thefederal.com, is still 95% free. We have adopted the freemium model by placing 5% of our offering behind the paywall. Rest 95%, I'm reiterating, 95% continues to be free. The premium section costs rupees 365 a year. In other words, only ₹1 a day. So kindly, the viewers of this program, type in www.thefederal.com and subscribe to the section, which will get you articles and ground reports that you would rarely find in other publications. I really mean it. Some of our pieces actually deal with more burning and relevant problem rather than running around with news breaks which happen around us all the time. So we try to get into more basic issues like education, health, infrastructure, environment, these kind of issues we face. Thank you very much. I think Anvita is waiting for quite some time and she wants to explain carbon credit. Please go ahead.
So by carbon credit, we mean that the company or the organization, whoever receives a carbon credit certificate, it's given in the form of certificates. So they are permitted to emit carbon to a certain level. So for example, so it is meant, and the unit is CER. So CER is carbon emission ratio. which means from 1 hectare of carbon storage, you're allowed to release a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So this is what it means. So now what is happening is and the amount that developed countries pay to the developing countries is 2021 amount that they have committed is 39. I think it's $34.99. So that's what they have mentioned for 1 carbon credit. And 1 carbon credit means the forest is going to store 1 hectare of carbon dioxide in the trees. So this is what they mean by carbon credit. And when we talk it in the Indian scenario, then there are many issues and many challenges with this, because here we were earlier in the discussion, we were talking about democracy. But when we talk about carbon credits, it actually takes away all the rights from the community when we sell it in the market. Because in one way, the developed country is paying India. So if we take India as an example, and India in return is giving the money to the forest department or whosoever is the owner. If it is a private forest, then it will pay the money to the private forest owner, otherwise the forest department. So the community is protecting it. The community in the Himalayas, they are dependent upon the forest for their daily sustenance, like firewood, fodder, for all these things. But as soon as we sell them for carbon credits, we actually take away all the rights from the community and give it to somebody else. And the way they claim is, it's basically, if it is coming from 4 channels, then actually the amount that they are mentioning. So for example, India has adopted, for example, Uttarakhand forest, and they say that they have stored around 100 tons of carbon in their forest. So that money has given to a particular organization, and that organization is protecting that forest. So that organization is going to say that with their efforts, they have stored 100 tons of carbon. Now, the first payment, the first funder will say that with their money, they have protected 100 tons. Then a developed country would say they have given funds to that agency and they have protected 100 tons. So now it actually multiplies. In aggregate, it seems to be like 400 tons of carbon have been stored. But actually the storage is only 100 hectares. But since one or the other ownership is with the agencies, so that there is actually a number which goes wrong in the reports, which says, okay, a certain amount of carbon is already stored in that forest. That's the major challenge. Who is going to claim it? And at what risk? And with who's, so it's the community which is at the losing end. When we talk about Himalayas, Himalayas are vulnerable. They are growing mountains, they are young mountains. When the policy is made, it is made at the central level. Now we have Uttarakhand State Action Policy of Climate Change. But when we look at the policy and we look at the budget that is allotted to infrastructure development, is basically 80% of the total budget that has been allotted to all sectors. So that sector includes forestry, agriculture, tourism, water, everything. But 80% of the budget allotment is with the infrastructure. So this clearly says what priority are we giving in which area. Uttarakhand and Himalayas, they are highly heterogeneous. So one policy cannot be replicated in the area which is actually very fragile, which lies on hilly slope. We are talking about Chardham highways, 4 lanes. Is it required? Like, can't we go with 2-lane highways? Like, why are we breaking all the mountains? And then we're not preparing the mountains. Like, for example, if I have blasted a part of the mountain, because that's the technology that they use, there is no remedial measures that they do on these slopes. So in the first rainfall, everything is going to come as a landslide, rockfall, and landslips, all sorts of things that is going to happen. This is what has happened. In terms of the recent flood that we have seen in Uttarakhand, in Nainital region, so Nainital already lies in seismic 4 zone. The lake is on the fault line. It has a major recharge zone, which is a dry lake, and the government has already passed budget of around 26 crores to build an artificial lake in Nainital to increase more tourism. So this is how we have funds, but what priority? Like if tourism is the priority for the state, then I don't think we should be talking about disasters anymore, because this is going to happen and people have to survive. And whenever a disaster happens, it actually changes all the social structure that has been present there, and it actually destroys everything that one society prepares. There's no learning from the lessons, from the past lessons that have been happened, maybe Kedarnath tragedy or maybe the recent floods, because the program is still in, the community is raising voices, but there's no leadership in filing a PIL, like who is going to file the PIL, in whose name. Everybody knows the importance of it. Now, forest policy is being revised. So 1st November is the deadline for the thing. But is the community, like, have the government reached to the right people, or the right people have actually communicated their points in the policy? Here we are talking about policies and plans and everything, but right inputs from the right people is not going in the policy, and that's the biggest problem. And that is why the basic problem in implementation is that policies are very nice, very good, it looks very good in the paper, but when it comes to implementation, it is not possible, because it is not holistic, it is not heterogeneous, and it is only one center thing that they have made, and they want it to be replicated in all parts of India, which is very different. So that's the problem which I see from my lens.
Right. Now, I want to ask a question to Sumaira. Madam, you have heard everyone. There are two things, the theme which is coming across is constantly decentralized. Decentralized decision making is very important. The second is the policy is actually only on paper. It actually doesn't boil down. You also referred to this when you said about EV targets. See, the thing is, you also have to believe in human ingenuity. The renewable energy right now, if you look at the share overall, it's apparently it's about 22% right now, which is both solar and wind power. Of course, it has its problem. The plant load factor and other issues are there. It is not as high as coal-powered plants. So there are lots of things which need to be fixed. But why it is difficult to see that this target can be doubled in next decade? They want to, the government apparently wants to achieve a 40% target in next one decade. Why it is not possible? What do you think?
Well, I think we are increasing our dependence on coal because we are increasing the infrastructure and the projects which will use power. For example, EVs itself is a central goal of COP, along with 3 others, one of which is reduced reliance on coal and increased biodiversity. But when we increase the reliance on electricity because we have so much need, which is real need. I mean, say in a village, you have need of electricity, but we also kind of have policies which cover up the back end in a way. And I think Anvita just referred to that. Is it Anvita? Sorry, just referred to that it doesn't reflect on the ground. So EVs are a very good example. I mentioned them, that we want 30% EVs of all our vehicles, which is a great aspiration. It's completely in line with COP goals. And it sounds fantastic when we go to a place like COP and make this statement. The trouble is that our budget doesn't do anything to help us in that. And it also completely fails to understand that EVs require batteries, and batteries require charging, and charging requires electricity, which brings us back to coal, because electricity is increasing our reliance on coal. And using this whole thing of having EVs as the answer to everything, which works in the West but doesn't work in India, because of the coal which is finally going to power these EVs, we are taking that opportunity as a cover to build roads faster than anyone else has or can do. We are building roads at an unprecedented pace. We are taking the roads and those linear projects through national parks and eco-sensitive areas. You mentioned the Western Ghats, that's one of them, but there are many others. I saw a road which was marked in the Corbett National Park, where the locals told me that this road really is not required, but it's an infrastructure project, and because you spend money. Then there's the whole issue of sand mining, which I believe and has fallen through the cracks. No one talks about it. But sand forms the basis of our entire civilization because cement concrete requires sand or an alternate aggregate. So we have all these things which are fueling these, these kind of the new Chicago every year, which our Prime Minister announced to be built in India, comes from sand. It requires coal. It emits greenhouse gases. So how does an aspiration to have 30% EVs, which is not translated into either budgetary or policy decisions which are implementable, really give us that reduction in greenhouse gases, except as something which will happen at some undefined time in the future? Certainly it does nothing now. What's happening now is that we are cutting forests for the coal that we will need for that. We are continuing to sand mine in areas. And yes, while it does bring relief, so something like electricity to the poor, the fact is that climate disasters do the exact opposite. So we are giving them something with one hand, which may be better electrification and things which we are highlighting a lot. But we are not talking about the fact that we are giving with one hand and taking away much more than we are giving with the other hand, which is really benefiting our cities. Because we are destroying those forests for electricity. We are giving them some, it's true, but the major part of that comes to the city. And Mumbai is an example. Mumbai requires more than half of Maharashtra's entire power. So how does having EVs compensate for building highways and destroying forests in Maharashtra, or in, and those EVs which we don't know, and in building coastal roads, which increases the total number of vehicles on the road, which will require more coal? How does the 3% of solar energy, which is currently generated in Maharashtra, compensate for the 50% of electricity of the whole state that Mumbai is using, which is coal-fired mostly?
Right. Thank you. Here is the question which I asked Dr. Sri Kumar. I don't think I got an answer, but maybe Leo would like to take it. On issues of ecology versus development, is there a mindset problem? Is there no difference between how the left and right-wing governments think? I'm specifically giving an example of Kerala. You may say that central government takes lots of major decisions, but then there is a say, the state government. How do you see this? I think audio is not clear. Are you muted?
Sorry, I just muted. Yeah. I think, the Prime Minister has just met Pope Francis in the Vatican, I think. And photos are floating around about both embracing. And Pope Francis wrote this treatise called the Laudato Si. It's like a letter he writes to the world, in which he said climate change is indicative of a period of irrational confidence in progress and human abilities. So in effect, what he's calling out for is the humility demanded for what the planet is. It's sacred. And that we simply have lost the idea of sacred. And there is also, in Amitav Ghosh's book, The Deranged, whatever, I lose the second word. Yeah, the Deranged World or something. He says that we are actually on the cusp of possibly redeeming ourselves from the catastrophic consequences of climate change if the global movements, people's movements, the kind of resurgence that I've seen across the world, and you rightly said it, that in most liberal democracies, 60, 70, 80% of the people want not to destroy the planet. Obviously, even if it is just self-interest, nobody wants a world in which we cannot live. It's a no-brainer. So it's really not a question of ecology versus economy. It is a question of how many of us are truly and fully applying our mind to the consequences of our actions. I guess one of the problems of the digital technology world that we are all now part of is that we choose what we are part of in such specific ways that so much that we need to be part of. The kind of conversations we need to have in our communities, in our neighborhoods, in our cities are simply not being had. And in fact, the pandemic, for instance, has affected us so substantially that we are not even conversing about what we need to talk about. You see, that is my real worry, that this probably is, I mean, obviously, if you have a cricket match, there'll be millions watching. But when you say that there is a disaster in Kerala, of course, millions will give money. But how long can that continue? Because the type of developmental paradigm which we are energizing, which our economic policies are energizing, which our politics as energized, that needs to go. And I guess it is critical that we realize it's not simply about leaving coal in the ground, not simply about choosing to drive an EV, not simply about relying on public transport, not simply about consuming less. It is all of this plus more. If we cannot make a case for small farms producing food which we consume locally, I mean 20-25% of the world's carbon is contributed by agriculture. If we do not say, I reject industrialized farming, I reject industrialized meat production, I reject centralized energy production, I want decentralized energy production. I think these are the type of transformational statements each one has to make. So it's not enough to say we want renewables and then Adani and Ambani pour 150,000 crores of their money, which obviously they're going to recapitalize, and their return on investment is so high that I have studied solar parks across the country. And I find in each and every case, they are no different from the impact big dams have in terms of displacement and dislocation. So when we move towards renewability, the transition needs to be environmentally just. It has to be socially inclusive. It has to be absolutely deeply democratic. People must be in the center of decision-making choices. So it is not to say democracy is tokenistic. It is one step closer to a solution. I'm not saying democracy is a perfect project, but at least a better project than the totalitarian states that we have. And half the world is ruled by totalitarians today. And even Indian democracy is moving towards an emergency era type of situation. So these are the warning signs we have. So I think we really need to work ground up. And recently we did a small exercise, and I'll share briefly that. We created a Bangalore climate action plan. And what we found fascinating was in 9 sessions, we got almost anybody we wanted to be part of and many more willing to debate. And when we crafted it into a small document and we shared it, and we have shared it across the country, so many other districts are saying, can we have something like that in our own district? So I guess planning has to go down to that level. And like Sumaira Abdulali says, the government of Maharashtra has taken initiative for Bombay. Now, it should not limit itself to Bombay. It has to go through every district. And I want to end by saying the Constitution has actually thought about it in 1992. We have Article 243ZD, which says that if you really want to develop and you want to plan that development, which is inclusive, it is not just economic and social inclusivity, but it should take into consideration water resources, natural resources, and environmental conservation. And that plan has to be renewed every 5 years. It's called the District Draft Development Plan.
Right.
Not a single district across the country has gone down that path. So I guess we have to better hurry and get on with the Article 243ZD promise. And I'm sure we can make progress there.
Right. The constant message I'm getting is that we need to look more natively at environment as a problem. But here is a video I would like to show here, which UNDP has crafted for this IP, COP26. And I'm reminded of Madam Sumaira Abdali's comment that the whole, perhaps what she's trying to say, as I understood, the climate change as a concept seems to be more of a Western concept from what we have, the way net zero and other things being crafted. I would like you to just check out this. How do you see this? How much you relate to this? Here is a video which is quite striking.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. Driving yourselves extinct in 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
So here it is. Let's now quickly hear all of you, because we're reaching the end of the program now. Each one of you, what should India say at COP26 finally? Let's go one by one. This time I start with Mr. Nulkar, Dr. Nulkar.
What should India say at COP26? I think we have been one of the nations which have been pressing the Western world, the developed world, to do more than their bit. That has to be maintained. The second thing is, I think we are too light on our NDCs. They are pretty much easily within our range if we are able to, arrange our ministry, so like I said before. So we have to be much more rigorous in terms of our nationally determined commitments. We're just leaving it too light. And I think that is one of the most important commitments that we have. The third thing which I would also like to suggest here is that pressing for the biodiversity protocol, the Nagoya protocol, and getting the act of ecological sequestration and aquatic water bodies, the oceans, the global common goods,
Right. Okay.
into the purview of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anvita? I think you have to unmute.
Sorry for that. So I have 2 points to summarize my stand in the COP. I think India should focus on how to reduce the cost of technology for mitigation and for co-development of technology, as rightly said by Sumara ji also, where we are talking about cutting down fossil fuel thing, but we need to work on reducing the cost of technology for mitigation measures that we are proposing. The second thing I would like to highlight is India should also focus on the progress of Article 6. So where the Article 6, which talks about the carbon trading markets, if we can improve that, because we have Himalaya, we have Western Ghats, if there's something can be improved in the Article 6, where we can talk about, to talk in detail about the carbon trading markets, and I think it will be a good stand for India to take. That's all. These are the 2 submissions.
Yeah. Madam Sumera?
I think we should absolutely commit, because that commitment makes us responsible to net zero, and that we should lay down along with that an actionable plan which takes local communities and people into confidence, and that we should improvise on ways of making that commitment happen, because we are clearly among those who are going to be most affected, and our poorest people are going to be affected the most. So we need to ensure their safety by making these commitments not only in an international forum, but to ourselves and for ourselves.
Dr. Shikumar?
Yes. So I'm pressing 3 or 4 main focus points. One is ecosystem restoration and protection. That is very important as far as India is concerned. Second is ocean pollution. That is going to be a problem in future. Then the waste reduction strategies we have to plan very meticulously. Then we have to address inequalities, the rich, poor, consumption, and other things. So these are the things that we have to keep focus.
Yeah. Leo?
Yeah, thanks. And I'd like to say less than a century ago, India was a inspiration between the 2 world wars to promote the idea of political freedom and through a peaceful movement, which eventually led to our independence. And we set off the process for overthrowing colonization. But here we are now, less than a century after our independence, battling what would be one of the most great, or the greatest challenge humanity has faced. And I guess here we have an opportunity to say, look, world, we mean business, and we are going to do everything internally to ensure that we are keeping our forests intact, our rivers flowing, our coasts undisturbed, pastoralist and agrarian communities supported. People living in cities will be living healthy lives and not in polluted atmosphere. And we'll make sure our villages work like J.C. Kumarappa wanted, the Gandhian economist as we called, so that they don't need to migrate. And we don't see the migrant crisis like we saw in the worst form last year. And we won't have to worry about pandemics because we invest in health and education everywhere. And we will regard Adivasi rights. We will not ensure a Stan Swami has to die in prison. We'll make sure political prisoners will be a thing of the past, because here is a country which truly believes in the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and we're going to start at home, making sure everyone within India feels at home, and we want the world to ensure that every human feels at home.
Thanks. Thank you, everyone. We're running out of time. I want to thank all the panelists before I conclude. You see, climate change is a very complex subject. It can't be summed up quickly, but the only thing I hope that in the next decade, we are able to, we manage to restrict the temperature rise within 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think that should be the target, and everyone should, the nations and, even the UN, everybody should be trying to work towards that. I really look forward that some such positive thing will happening in the remaining part of our lives. Thanks, everyone. I want to thank each one of the panelists individually for participating in this webinar. I finally conclude with an appeal to the readers once again that, please log into www.thefederal.com and subscribe to the 8th column, which is only 5% of what we offer. Rest is all free. 95% stuff we offer free. I'm just inviting you to be part of our journey. The Federal tries to put out different stories, different kinds of stories. I'm sure you